I would like to introduce all of you to my friend, blogger Dave, who was instrumental in helping create a couple of the beers for the kickoff birthday party while he was at Wellington. And he's currently now the head brewmaster at Elora Brewing. And he's won numerous awards, including the Hellas Lager drug that you have there, which is really good. But everybody, please give a warm welcome to Dave. Thank you for taking the time to come in and have a conversation with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start out just with a single question, and then we're going to start into the tasting.
Okay.
And I'd really like to know, who was your inspiration for getting into the brewing industry?
Who is my, oh geez. That's a tough question. Me getting into the brewing industry is kind of an interesting story. It goes something along the lines of I just really like beer, and I didn't actually, when I started working in the brewing industry, I didn't actually even know the ingredients that went into beer. I just knew that I liked to drink it.
That's great.
So I don't know if there's, I've had a number of people influence me and inspire me since I've been in the industry. You look back and you look at some of the people who've been around a lot. So obviously, me working at Wellington, Charles McLean was one of the first brewers there, and just to watch him, his passion and him grow the breweries that he did. So he's the first brewer at Wellington. Then he went on to start F&M, and now obviously McLean's. It's really nice when you see like the owner of a company doing the dirty work and really showing their love of the craft. A lot of people get away from that side of it, and he's always been really hands-on. So he'd be one of them for me, and then inspired by a lot of tradition in brewing, because there's so much history with it, and part of maybe this might be a question you might ask, but about my love for lagers was starting drinking the beer that a lot of us probably were drinking years ago, the macro lagers, which kind of gave it its bad name. There's the other side of that, where it's the tradition of brewing these beers, which is just remarkable. And when you have the chance to drink like some of these true styles, you realize that there are great examples of some of these beers.
Okay, that's great, Dave. I'm exactly what I was looking for, because you're right. I was going to ask you the passion for lagers, so you've answered that. What beer did you want to start with tonight?
Well, why don't we start with the Pilsner, the Pilsner Elora, because that's probably one of the lighter ones.
Okay. By the way, we still haven't determined if this is actually legal on YouTube to do this.
Well, we're not serving it, right? So yeah, this is a good one to start with, because it is one of our most delicate beers that we have. We pretty much doing at Elora, we're doing mostly lagers, hoppy pale ales, IPAs, and sours. That's probably 90% of what we do. It's what we like to drink, and so it's kind of what we like to make. And then we have some room to play around a bit. This recipe has been around before me, so I'm still new at Elora. I've been there since just February. So yeah, a lot of these recipes kind of predate me, but I love this beer right from the start. They're the brew team before, and Mike Brooks was the guy who came up with this recipe, and it's a fabulous fabulous beer. We have really hard water in Elora, as do a lot of places kind of that are not near a lake or a river in Ontario, and actually more so, like I thought Guelph was hard water, and this or water in Elora is almost probably twice as hard. So it's really tricky to work with in a beer like this. So the first thing we do is we bring in distilled water as the base, because the hardness of that water, we just can't make such a delicate beer like this, and it would kind of it would take away from it. But yeah, so it's a Bohemian or Czech style Pilsner. So all European Pilsner malt, all Saz hops, which is a hop used in the Czech Pilsners. Really soft and mineral-free water, and yeah, the proper Czech lager yeast from Escarpment Labs in Guelph, and it I think we have this one in tank about 5 to 6 weeks.
So you would describe this almost as like a classic Pilsner style.
Yeah, so actually, like if you want to get into the nitty gritty of the Czech Pilsners, they're usually a little bit actually darker in color, so that we do go on the lighter side for this one. So that comes from the number of decoctions they do. So decoction is when you boil a part of the mash, and basically when you're doing that, or even just when you're boiling the wort in the process, we're actually caramelizing it. It's the same as cooking, the melanoidin effect, where you can kind of, the more you cook something, the more kind of caramelization you're going to get. So that same effect happens in brewing. So we wanted to go a bit on the lighter side. We wanted this beer to be as kind of approachable as possible while still playing within the guidelines. So the guidelines, there's always a range we can go with, and we just wanted to make this beer as easily drinkable as possible while still having that wonderful maltiness, like good depth, good body, and an upfront hop character on it.
Okay. The seasonal, or is this on a regular lineup?
Well, this one is actually going to be our summer seasonal in the LCBO. So you'll find this one all summer and actually all through the fall in the LCBO. So it's kind of nice because we get to brew this a number of times, and kind of really just, me being new, just kind of dialing in the recipe, making little tweaks to the process and that sort of thing. Because any little difference in the process can be very noticeable in a beer that's has nothing to hide from. Versus, we're doing like our Shine IPA or something like that, and you have a little bit of a pH difference, or you have a little bit of a temperature difference, and you're probably not going to notice it because the amount of hops we throw in there. Versus in a beer like this, you will notice it, and that's why something brewers probably don't want to talk about and don't want to admit to is consistency. Consistency is the hardest thing, to be pushing out these beers and having the same kind of profile every time. It really is the trickiest thing. So if you look on the bottom of the can, you should always kind of look on the bottoms of your cans, because they'll have a date code. It's important because you want to know when your beer was either brewed or when the expiry date is. It'll give you one of the two. We put our package on date, so I'm drinking the June 19th batch. But if you're drinking the batch from May, then that one, we just had a little bit of a different fermentation profile, where it just came out a little bit on the sweeter side, still within spec, still within range, versus the June one was just a little bit kind of drier and a little bit crisper. And different people have different preferences for kind of where it lands. I'm always a fan of kind of a more drier beer styles. I don't really like big sweet beers. So, and that's the one thing. So we took from there, and we kind of just dialing in the recipe from there to keep it like that moving forward.
Yep. I noticed in the chat there's no questions, so I'm assuming that none of you have any questions for Dave at this stage. Cam.
Yeah, I have a couple questions if you don't mind. You mentioned, Dave, about the hard water being difficult to work with for fine beers. I believe that's the takeaway. Is that correct?
Yeah.
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 So you guys also make other beers that are a bit bigger, essentially. But is hard water ever a good thing for beer, or are there any styles that would do well with our water, or is it basically always you're filtering some of the minerals out in this area?
No, absolutely. Hard water is good for probably, within range, but it's good for most beer styles, I'd say, because most places around the world have some level of hardness to the water. And when you look at the historic brewing cities around the world, you'll notice that the styles that they're famous for brewing are made that way are made so well because of typically because of their water profile. Yes, because of the ingredients that they grow around them and stuff like that, but there's a reason why in Ireland and parts of England, dark beers are the beers they make is because the alkalinity is really high. And so to balance the pH out, you need the acidity from the dark malt to balance it and get in the right pH range. We know this now, so we can alter this ourselves. But before they had an idea of this, that's why your water would determine what kind of styles of beer you made. Some other examples are if we're talking about Pilsen and a Pilsner like this in Czech Republic, the reason why we brought in water and the reason why they could pack so many hops in. So when you look at Pilsner or Kel, that beer is 40 or 44 IBUs versus and the water is essentially mineral free. If you were to use that same recipe with hard water, it would taste very, very bitter because the way the minerals perceive bitterness. So an example is sulfate really accentuates bitterness. So where this beer has essentially zero sulfate, and maybe moderate sulfate might be 1 to 200 ppm. Our water in Elora is about 350. So that it's a reason why we make really good IPAs, because the sulfate really accentuates the hop, the bitterness of it. And then when if you look around other brewing styles, there are pale beers that have high hardness. So when you get more into Germany, they have harder water, and that's why their Pilsners there are more bitter once again, and drier, because it's typically sulfate is usually the predominant flavoring mineral in the water. And I'm just trying to think about some other styles. And there's a story of how the Helles style became in the Munich brewers were trying to replicate the Czech Pilsner for years. And at one point, they actually declared it impossible to make a pale beer because they were making their Dunkels, and then they were making the Marzen. They got it lighter, but then they couldn't get the pale beer until I think it was the Spaten brewery finally figured it out. But that's why the Munich Helles, water is harder, but that's why the Helles has less hops in it than a beer like a Pilsner, because if they were to put the same amount of hops in with their water profile, it would actually make the beer too bitter. And that's why you have the Helles. That's more of a, like they say, Helles is to malt what Pilsner is to hops. So you just kind of have to juggle around your ingredients in a way like that.
Darian, you had a question.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I'm curious, like when you're talking about the sulfates and stuff like that, you mentioned a lot about the sulfates that are naturally coming from the minerals in the water.
Yeah.
What if you, as a brewer, were to add them in during the process? Would that, like, I don't know if you guys have ever experimented or heard of anything like that. Like,
Yeah.
how would that come into play? And the reason that I'm so curious about that is, like, I've heard about the lab made whiskeys that are starting to come out, and so like
Okay.
the way that they're creating like aged flavorful whiskeys in a lab, like that they're not aging it in barrels or anything. I thought that was like really interesting, the chemistry there. And so like if you were to play with that as a brewer, do you think that the outcome would be controllable, or would it be just completely different?
No, absolutely, and it is totally controllable, and we do that all the time, within reason. So when I was at Wellington, we got this water treatment system in because again, our water was hard there, and we wanted to be able to be more versatile. Yes, the hardness is good, especially in those Wellington darker ales. That's why Wellington makes such good dark ales, is because the water is the kind of the perfect kind of hardness for it. So yeah, so we got this water treatment system. It was different from RO or reverse osmosis. Is where it used like a low kind of current, and the water ran through pairs of cells, and each pair of cell, one was either had a positive charge or a negative charge, where it actually attract the opposite ion when as it passed through, and so the minerals would get pulled out, stuck in this membrane, and then it would run for about a minute and a half, and then it would actually reverse the charge and free the ions and flush it down the drain. It's a brilliant system, and it didn't pull everything out. So we had, because we don't want everything out. For the most part, we want a good kind of base to work with, and then so we had this very clean kind of base to work with. So that at this point, we would add back calcium sulfate, calcium chloride, and any kind of bicarbonate that would use. That would be more for the darker beers to balance the pH. But yes, we'd play around with that, and having that opportunity is kind of what taught me so much about the water side of things. And you know, it's the best. I would say the best way to learn is to screw up. So I definitely screwed some beers up for sure. But then I learned from them. You know, I thought I could improve upon some of these existing brands, but no, I couldn't, because they are what they are because of the water profile. So yeah, it's a pretty simple. It's just like adding kind of like salts either to the mash or to the kettle, that sort of thing. And those would be the principal ions. So we have sulfate, which we talked about, which affects the bitterness and the sharpness and the dryness. And then we have chloride. So if you were to add more chloride, you kind of balance more the malty, sweet kind of roundness of the beer out. And it's not just the amount of either, it's how they interact together. So if you have like 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride, your beer is going to be bitter and dry. If you have 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate, it's going to be round and sweet. And then, you know, if you can go further and further apart and really accentuate that profile. As for the whiskeys, I don't know a ton about that. I haven't heard a lot about that, but it's interesting. I'm interested to know. Like, I don't know if you've tried any, but I'm interested to know if it comes out the same, because I know a while ago I heard this study that they were trying to mimic the flavor of smoked meat, because smoked meat is actually, you know, it's carcinogenic and delicious. And they were trying to remove that element of it that was bad for you. And people are saying, you know, it's pretty close, but it's not the real deal. It's not the same thing. So I'm curious, because barrels are a really complicated thing. There's lots going on in those things. So I'm wondering how close they could get.
You and
Yeah,
I can have a
I
long
think they're having a lot of
conversation.
trouble with the peat. I
Sorry,
think that
Darren.
like replicating the peat flavor they're having a lot of trouble with it. But that was really cool. Thank you for diving into that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So you and I, Dave, sometimes should sit down and have a beer, and we can talk about that face to face with regards
We
to
know
whiskeys.
about that, yeah.
Yeah, because that's more my forte.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
you? How are they? Do they stand up or?
Um, To the uninitiate, they would not notice the difference unless you were actually drinking them side by side.
Right.
To a person who's more of a Scotch snob, you would pick it up immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because you're right, the barrel aging adds a level of complexity that we still haven't quite duplicated yet.
Exactly. And can it even be done, right?
I'm not going to say it can't. It's just there's a level of complexity we still haven't been able to duplicate yet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Every year, flavor profiles and the work that people do on flavor profiles expands on everything that's gone on beforehand. So there's a lot of changes. So what beer do we going to switch to now, Dave?
Well, why don't we do I think a good one to jump to would be the Lorelei, the Keller Pills.
The Lorelei? Okay. Hardly any nose on this one, Dave.
Yeah, a bit less. It's a bit faded. This is one of the first beers that I brewed at Elora, so it is sort of getting towards the end of its life. When was this one packaged? In middle of April. So I guess we're going on to closer to 2.5, 3 months. Excuse me. So last nose, it is a bit faded. It is. I'm not sure if anyone tried this one before. It had probably a bit more nose, but not a ton either. So this is this would be more of a German style Pilsner. This one, I did bring in a little bit of water, but just to knock down our hardness just a little bit. But I wanted to, was going for the German Pilsner, so I wanted the bitterness to be kind of more upfront and dry. So to balance that, because I think a lot of things in recipe design are about balance. I do love those dry bitter German Pilsners. Maybe not everyone does, and I wanted to put a twist on this. So we used a bunch of spelt malt, and spelt is it's an ancient wheat. So it's essentially kind of doing the same thing. It's adding protein to the beer and adding more kind of body and in that sort of thing. So it gave it kind of more of a creaminess that would kind of balance that dry bitterness. And I mean, it's unfiltered, but the spelt also kind of gives it with the protein in there, it gives it more of a kind of a haze to it. So that's when you're drinking hazy IPAs and stuff like that, you're usually adding a protein malt like wheat or oats or something like that kind of helps with the creaminess and helps with the haze.
I like that. So I get a lot of creaminess, but there is just a slight back end hint in this one, almost earthiness to it.
Yeah.
Is that the spelt coming through?
No, I think it's probably more of the German noble hops that we used. I think It was Tettnanger and Hallertau tradition. There's a lot of kind of earthiness in those hops that comes through. So yeah, it's kind of a unique beer. We called it a Keller Pils because when you hear about Keller beers, for example, this isn't necessarily a Keller beer, but Keller beers basically means Keller is cellar in German, so it's drinking straight off the tank. So when you're drinking straight off the tank, the beer is unfiltered, kind of naturally, right? So it being a Keller is being more of the serving style of beer. So normally Keller beers are served from the tank or from a cask, that sort of thing. And I have to say, I was in Bamberg, Germany a couple of years ago, and that's the Franconia region. So Bamberg is known for their smoked beers, but also known for their Keller beer. And that was some of the best beer I ever had.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Ed.
I can't help but ask why Lorelei. Like I know what Lorelei is. Like we actually went down the Rhine last year and saw the everything. Just wondering who picked the name.
Yeah, so one of the owners of the brewery has a lot to do with kind of the naming and branding, and he kind of really likes that kind of mythology and that sort of stuff. So maybe you can fill in the story, because what I remember is it was a tale about this lady who would blow her horn and attract sailors to her, but then they would crash on a rocky cliff and all drown.
Yeah, it's something like that. I'm not sure about the whole mythology, but they call that cliff Lorelei. It's at a bend in the Rhine. When you take
Okay.
the boat down the river, it's like a famous profile there. It's really cool.
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't even exactly sure where it was, but yeah, I think that's what they said. Yeah, it was I don't know if it was her name or something like that. What they said it was, but they would kind of lure them to their death anyway. So
Well, I think it's the traditional siren mythology combined with the cliff. It's on the Rhine. I forget exactly where between, but somewhere near north of Frankfurt, in that area.
okay, interesting. And a lot of people have asked if it's a Gilmore Girls reference, and when we're coming out with who's the coffee shop guy? I've never watched the show. Anyways, when we're coming out with the coffee porter, Luke, that's it. But no, it's not a Lorelei. It's not a Gilmore Girls reference.
Can I ask a quick question here, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Dave, you're mentioning basically how water variability with like the ratio of sulfates to other minerals impacts the flavor and then like the bitterness. Would you say that water quality or the type of ingredients in the water and the minerality of that water is almost more important than the hops that are added? Like, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah, I wouldn't say it. I kind of obsess over it a bit, but probably your primary ingredients are the what's going to drive the most of the flavor, and then water is kind of your fine-tune knob, how you can really dial it in. A lot of breweries don't do anything, and in the case, say like for Wellington, for example, it was not doing anything was the best thing you could do. We have a lot of variability in our water sources across Ontario, and so it can work in your favor or it cannot. So I think it's just kind of what you're trying to do. Your primary ingredients are the most important thing, and then if you can dial in your water profile, that's kind of like the fine-tune knob. It's one of those last little tricks that you can really dial the beer in.
Now, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong on this. You have worked preliminary on a program or a process to analyze everything that goes into a beer to tweak the recipes, but you're also now working on the water profiles.
Yeah, absolutely. And for that, I use a different program because the math gets really complicated and over my head. And there's a program out there that allows you to really easily to play with your water profile, and it gives you all the kind of historic water profiles from around the world if you're trying to match, or guidelines if you're wanting to make like an amber bitter beer or a dark sweet beer, or it gives you kind of good examples of that. But then it kind of still leaves it to you to that's kind of like the science, and there's the art of it, so you can kind of try different things out. So sometimes you might think that a malty beer should have a malty water profile, but it doesn't always work like that. So if you guys have most of you have had SPA from Wellington, it's a malty beer, but it's high in sulfate, and so that gives it its dry, kind of crisp finish, and the flavor then doesn't linger around. So that's why it's such an easily drinkable beer. So there's all kinds of little tricks like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Steve from Innocente, and he checks the water every day because there are 3 main wells for KW.
Mhm.
And depending on where they're drawing water, it changes the whole water profile.
Absolutely, yeah. I've heard of a number of Kitchener brewers talking about this, and it's it's impossible to tell. Like unless you're kind of stripping that water down, it's impossible to tell what you're working with that day. And so yeah, if you can do some tests on it to get an idea, then that's your kind of your best bet, because water treatment is expensive.
Yes, it is. And it doesn't necessarily solve your problem for you.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So anybody else have any questions at this stage?
Not a direct question about the water stuff. I don't know if this is something that I had to step out for 5 minutes. So I don't know if I missed anything about this, or if it's something that you wanted to talk about later. But I recently started to learn a little bit more about saisons, and when it comes to like water there, I guess to relate it, I don't know how familiar you are with it because I know it's like a whole nother category. Um, like when you're dealing with that kind of infusions and stuff, and you're dealing with that many more compounds, do you think that the water has as big of an impact, or at that point does it kind of mellow everything out?
Yeah, I think with a style like of saison, I haven't done a ton of that French and Belgian kind of brewing, but I think it will kind of show more in like a really delicate beer, like the Pilsner or something like that. But that's not to say that it doesn't impact every style. And so I'm not exactly sure what the profile is there, but I imagine it's not overly hard because it's a pale beer, so the alkalinity would be fairly low. And I imagine I feel that most saisons, although there is kind of like how the yeast kind of is the driving character of it, and although it is kind of lends a bit of a sweetness to it, it still is a dry beer. So I would imagine that there's still kind of that higher sulfate in the water, which kind of um, gives it the dry finish.
Dave, I have another question for you.
Okay.
Pre-COVID, what was your favorite place to dine out?
Yeah, that's a tough call. There's so many great restaurants. I think that one of our favorite places to go, because it's a great place and it's because it's almost right across the road from us, was Public here in Kitchener. It's just a fabulous restaurant. Food is always spectacular. The environment is really nice, and we would treat ourselves to a nice meal like that once in a while. But I think a lot of the time when we'd go out, especially if we might be grabbing food or might be having some beers or something like that. But the environment really is the number one thing. It's kind of what makes it fun to do that sort of thing. So just when you're going out, some of my favorite places to go do would be like the Woolly in Guelph and Ethel's in Waterloo, because it's just that it gives it that environment, that kind of just that welcoming kind of environment where people there. There is this bar in Waterloo. It's called Kickoff. It was a pretty nice spot to have a couple of beers.
Yeah, it used to be.
I
Thank
heard
you.
the
You have my heart, David.
The bartender there was just a weird guy. I don't know, just not a great guy.
Yeah, it could be nasty. I know. You want to switch to another beer, or you want me to ask you another hard question?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Are we ready? Are we ready for another beer? Or?
Well, I haven't chugged down both of them yet, but I'm not in an engineering boat race right now, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, I haven't finished. I'm just doing little bits because I got to work early tomorrow. I can't drink 6 beers.
Yeah, something about having to get up early and go to work makes it limiting, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, we could open another one. I'm just trying to think where we should go to next. Maybe we should do the alt beer next.
Second. Ed, did you have a question or a statement?
Oh, just a question. I'm only going to have one more because it's just me having them. Um, any suggestion for if I should hold on or have the alt beer? Like I picked up a selection, so whatever you're doing, I'm going to be able to have.
Have one more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm good with having the alt. Like it's, my limit's pretty low, so I had the one Lorelei, and then I'll have and then skip the alt or do the alt beer.
well, do you like it? So it's more of a malty beer. Do you like that sort of thing, or?
Yeah. Well, actually, I had one of them yesterday, so
Okay.
maybe that's reason to skip it then.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if you want to try something, try one of the other ones then.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll skip it then. But if you think that the one, whatever you do after it or whenever, let me know when it's like, you know what, this is the beer to have.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So we don't do, yeah, this is a small batch that we did, and we typically don't do a lot of, darker and malty style beers there, but it was a style that I've been wanting to do it for a while. And our one brewer, Andrew, he was really keen on the style. He had been to Dusseldorf a couple years ago, and he was just, he got super excited to brew this style. And I think he brewed it, and he went home and put his lederhosen on and ate some pork knuckle. So yeah, so there's a lot going on in this beer. We used a number of different malts. We wanted to really kind of dial in that maltiness. We used a type of base malt that the German malting company Weyermann is doing. They're doing this kind of this heritage barley variety, and it kind of just lends to more kind of aromatic, more better like quality in the brew house kind of malt, and just kind of overall kind of improved flavor profile. It's called Barca malt, so we kind of just adds more richness. So I wanted to try it out. So it was one of my first times using that malt, and or they're different styles of that malt, because they do like the Vienna malt and the Munich malt. So we layered this beer from pale malts all the way to the darkest malts. So we did, started with a Pilsner malt as a base, and then we would add in some Vienna malt, which is just kind of kiln dried, a little bit higher temperature, which just gives you kind of more of that like biscuity kind of flavors, all the way to Munich malts, which are kilned even hotter, so they get kind of more toasty flavors in there. And then we used we didn't want to go over the top on the crystal malts. We used some lighter to darker crystal malts, which gives it more, gives it that sweetness, gives it that kind of like that dark dried fruit kind of character, caramel flavor. And then we used some roasted malts that would kind of give it that's kind of that smokiness to it. But we kept kind of using smaller and smaller amounts as we went up, and just kind of wanted to make a really complex beer.
Varian.
So alt beer, alt in German is old, so it's their old style. And so where lagers were gaining popularity across Germany, a couple brewing cities, Dusseldorf and Cologne, held off, and they continued to brew ale. So that's why alt and Kolsch are still ales. Though they are lagered, which lagered means to store, so the beer sits cold for a long time to mature.
Question on something like this where you're dealing with so many different flavors. How often do you guys kind of like make these decisions on how you're gonna how you're going to do the big batches based on what you guys think versus I don't know if you do any like small batches, test it with people, and then refine, test it with another group, refine, test it with another group. Like that part's I'm really curious about kind of how that whole trial and error process works.
Yeah, so this would have been one of our smaller batches, so it would have been about 1,000 liters. We don't really have like a pilot system. Our pilot system is just kind of doing a single brew, and we have some smaller tanks versus our bigger tanks are 5 to 7,000 liters. So that's kind of our trial period. And then once we've kind of, we've always figured out that there's things about this beer that would probably change for the next time. And we know, we're fairly confident that we're gonna make a good beer. And ending exactly where you want is tricky especially on a first time recipe. It's nearly impossible. But we wanted to, we kind of have to try and have a bit of fun, play around with it, and then refine it. So if we do bring this beer back as a bigger batch, then we'll kind of make those tweaks and try it again.
Cam?
I'm not sure if you can talk about this at all, Dave, but it must have been a trend. And wanted to bring the alt beer from Dusseldorf. You got a lot of German influence in your styles you're talking about, like Keller beers, Helles lagers, and alt beers and stuff. I think I might have an idea based on some of the stuff you earlier said, but my favorite style of lager probably is actually a Bock, and also German. And I think earlier you said you're not a huge fan of bigger, sweeter beers, but what are your thoughts on Bocks? And you guys don't make any, I don't think, if I'm not mistaken. And what are your thoughts on those? So, Bill, back in the day, you had some Doppelbocks, I think, on tap every once in a while for the seasonal and stuff. Just curious of your thoughts on Bock, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's not that they are definitely bigger and sweeter beers. I normally gravitate towards lower ABV beers because normally I'm not just gonna have one. Like if I like the part about beer where it's where you're going out and you're gonna be with friends and you're gonna have a couple, and you're gonna have a session, as they call it, or whatnot. So that's what I would normally gravitate to. That said, there are some awesome Bocks. I made one at Wellington. It was a Maybach, so it was the lightest, or a Helles Bock, I guess. It's the lightest and kind of the hoppiest of the Bocks. And so Bock is meant to be, it's a winter beer, but not only that, it's meant to be drank outside, and that's why it is the way it is. Why it's such a big beer, because you need to keep warm, wait for drinking outside in the beer garden in the winter. So I think there's a time and place for kind of every style. So if I'm going to be doing something like that, then that's the beer I would want. And the Bocks, the different styles of Bocks are interesting because they actually change with the weather. So the strongest and the darkest Bocks are brewed, or they're served at the coldest times of the winter, and then they get lighter as the spring comes along until that the Maybachs or the Helles or Heller Bocks come out in the spring. So it's close to, you're getting closer back to your Helles, your Pilsner. It's not quite that warm to drink them outside, so you still need that extra alcohol and that extra punch to kind of to keep you going.
So Dave, I do have a question about the malt.
Yep.
So you're making a 1,000-liter batch. How do you decide the blends of the malt? Do you like blend all the malts together and take the aroma? What's that process?
I mean, that's the fun part about it, is you get to we get to create that, and we get to bounce the ideas back and forth. So me and Andrew, I think we're just talking mostly over a weekend and text, kind of, you look up, might start by looking up kind of what historically has been done, and then we take that and we kind of we decide what we want the beer to be like. So some of these alt beers, for example, are are sweeter and with a lot heavier crystal malt use, and I wanted to get there without doing that. So that's why we use like a lot of Munich and those richer base malts. So it's not going to add too much sweetness. There's going to be a lot of complexity, and we're going to get the color we're looking for, but we didn't want that too much sweetness. So that's why we kind of kept those crystal caramel malts lower and did more darker base malts. So yeah, it's really kind of the brewer's choice. It is the art of it, and it's what makes every brewery's beer different, because you have the same style from two different breweries and they'll be completely different beers.
Yep. So another question I have for you. I like malt forward beers, and I would not necessarily call an alt beer a malt forward beer, but would you?
Oh yeah, I would. Again, I don't think, I'm not sure if we brought in water for this one or not, but again, our water is extremely high sulfate, extremely low chloride. So instead of it kind of accentuating the malts, it kind of is more on the drier side. So it's not, you don't get that kind of lingering malt sweetness afterwards. It still does finish kind of quick and dry. So I would call it malt forward, as in like the malts are what is showcased in the beer, but it's unlike say certain brown ales or stouts or whatever, where the malts really do kind of fully take over the beer.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for Dave at this moment? No. Wow, Cam.
Just a practicality question, I guess. The second time you mentioned bringing in water to use for brewing, that seems like an extravagant expense. I'm guessing that only is the case because it's cheaper than filtering or than ROing it or whatever you want to do. Is it what's the limiting factor on that? Is like transportation of water? I'm guessing isn't that cheap for buying it, but like how much is it? Is it a practicality issue where like if the outlay for an appropriate filtration system would be prohibitive? Is that the situation? Or I never heard of brewers in this area like bring in water. That's all I'm saying.
So yeah, we don't do it a lot. I think I was wondering if we used some in it, because we brewed this after we brewed our Pilsner. So we are bringing in water for our Pilsner because it calls for it. If we want to brew that style, we kind of have to do it. And then I think we may have had some left over, so we may have kind of blended it, use some of it, leftover water for this beer. But yeah, we wouldn't do it a lot because it does raise the price. I forget, I've done the math before, and it goes from cents a liter to probably closer to I'm not sure if it's quite dollars, but the price jumps up quite a bit. So yeah, we don't do it a ton right now, just mainly just for the Pilsner there, but a water treatment system is on our radar to have that, and just so we can have the flexibility moving forward. But there's just more pressing things that we need at the brewery at this time before we can go ahead with something like that.
Cool, thanks.
So Dave, oh, sorry, Terry.
Okay. Dave, as a brewer, which I'm obviously not, can you look at a recipe on a piece of paper and kind of imagine in your head what that beer is going to taste like within some range? Or is it you really aren't going to know until you brew it?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can, if I'll just see the exact recipe written out, I might do some quick math to see what are the percentages of malts and what are the IBUs contributed by the hop additions and stuff like that. If I could lay some of that stuff out, I'll have a good example. But the other side of it is maybe not, because every brewer has different procedures. So two brewers might brew the exact same recipe and still end up with a different result, because your brewing practices can really define some of the key flavors as well.
So can you actually refine on paper and go, yeah, nah, or do you actually have to brew and then refine?
Yeah, like I mean, I've been doing it a while now, so I can kind of look at it and say, well, I would, I may do this. So if someone came to me with a recipe and I might say I would change this or change that, or maybe maybe just try it and maybe I'm wrong. And the other thing is everybody has different preferences too. So what I like is not what everybody likes, and I realize that too. But
Cool, thank you.
yeah, no problem.
Sure.
Just gonna piggyback on that question because that's kind of interesting. Once you brew something or once you taste something, say you have the recipe in front of you, are you able to say this needs twice as much crystal malt, or this just needs a little bit more crystal malt, or do you have that kind of perception as well of what doubling a certain ingredient might do once you've tried it, or is it a matter of you need to try doubling it and then see how it affects the taste? Like, how do you dial things in, I guess, once you're in the process of brewing and trying variations of a new beer or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think to a certain degree, and that's why it's so good. We have tastings all the time of the beers, and we kind of sit around in a circle, and everybody everyone has their input on what it needs. And yeah, so I think sometimes some things like that are pretty obvious. Sometimes the challenges are, again, getting away from the recipe. So like, yeah, maybe your color's off, or yeah, maybe you want more of a certain malt character or something like that, or hop character. But then sometimes you might say, oh, this beer, the hop aroma isn't good on it. So then you'll go back and you'll look more at your brewing process, because once again, it's so much will happen just in your process. If you're is your beer, are you adding the hops too early, or are you adding, or is it sitting hot too long, or certain things like this? I'm not sure if that answers the question, but go ahead.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I wasn't looking for a specific answer, so that's all interesting. It's all part of the process. But it just reminded me that there are so many variables, right? There's your water, your hops, your malts, your yeast. Like, how do you decide which one you want to zero in on and start to play with? Because each one can have a major impact on, the beer you get at the end. So how do you kind of focus on, oh, this needs a different hop, or this needs the hops to go in a different stage, or versus, this needs a different malt, or the water is not quite right, How do you kind of choose which one to zero in on?
Yeah, I think that the style kind of requests certain things. So if you're trying, I guess the main thing is, are you trying to like replicate a certain style or something like that? Because if you're doing that, then it may be more obvious that that something needs to change. But are you making, is it your house pale ale or something like that, where it's not a specific thing? So then I think a lot of it ends up coming down to preference. So yeah, what is your personal preference on a certain beer, and what are you looking for? So like, a lot of beers are, maybe a lot of recipes are quite simple on a certain front. So, a lot of hoppy beers are basically just, a pale malt, maybe some protein malts and hops. There's like kind of are the driving force. So if you're looking for certain characters out of the hops, maybe this year's crop of Citra is different from last. So all of a sudden you're getting you're brewing the same recipe now and using the exact same ingredients. Well, not the exact same, different crop year. All of a sudden, you're getting a different flavor profile, and that's another thing why I say consistency is really the hardest thing to accomplish day to day and year to year.
Oh, who's first? Ed.
I guess circling back on water and place and preference and style and stuff, why are all the Mediterranean beers almost cloyingly sweet? Like they're all pretty much sweet lagers, whether you're looking Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece. It seems like everything around that whole circle hits exactly the same notes.
Okay.
I maybe it's outside of what your experience is. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about those beers, but like it kind of sounds like we're talking about like international Pilsner style.
Oh yeah, they're macros. They're all, I would just call them light sweet lagers almost across the board, but they seem to be particular to there. Like once you get off once you get off the Mediterranean, you tend to get the crisper, drier pilsners and stuff.
Wave high.
Sorry, the which side of them?
Once you get off of the coast, you get into the crisper, drier pilsners, like the German pilsners, right? Like it really does seem though, like around the coast, everything is sweet.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know, but like a lot of it comes down to like what is the preference of the people there. They same way they flavor hot dogs differently per region, right? Because certain people like different things. I'm not sure why. I'm sure it's intentional though. I think a lot of once you start getting away from, where kind of some of these lagers came from in Germany and Czech Republic and stuff like that. The style, Pilsner being the most replicated style in the world, it really starts to change quite a bit. And so, a Pilsner is different in Germany than it is in Portugal, than it is in Canada, than it is in Argentina, or so everybody's is kind of recreating something, and it's a big kind of it was big kind of game of telephone where it's we can make this pale beer, and then this one is crisper and drier, but then this one is sweeter, and then we start losing some of the hops, and we kind of start taking out more of the hops, because what happens when you put more hops in a beer is it doesn't age and hold up and transport as well, and then we start using hop oils and stuff like that. So you're not really getting that same kind of flavor, but you're getting a more stable beer.
Thank you. I didn't expect to have a particular answer. I was just curious if you had any ideas there. I really appreciate your thoughts there.
Yeah, so it must just be kind of like a preference thing of the area.
And there is actually some fantastic Italian craft beer, but it doesn't travel. Like you have to basically go to Italy to find it. And I would guess that Spain, Portugal, etc. would too. I mean, they all do wine, and if they do wine well, they tend to do beer well. But if they choose to,
right. Yeah, that's interesting.
Derek.
Hey, Dave, I got a question for you.
Who's talking right now?
Pete, go
It's
ahead.
Keith. Sorry.
Okay.
Hey, man. Hi, Bill. Hi, Kim.
I can't see you. You're just.
Oh, sorry. You don't want to see this face.
Ah, yes, I do.
There you go.
Yes.
Hey, you're glad
How you
you
doing,
asked. So how important do you find seasonality for beers? Because I don't know from your perspective, but from mine in the beer industry, I find people are like, I only drink this, I only drink that. And I'm like, that's like saying you only eat French onion soup. So on a 45-degree-Celsius day, you only want a steaming hot bowl of French onion soup. And I kind of call bullshit on it. What is it from your perspective?
I love breweries that do seasonal beers. we kind of, yeah, we don't kind of see as much of that. You know, a lot of breweries are always constantly putting out something new, like one-offs and this sort of thing. But I love it because it kind of goes back to the tradition of brewing. Like, why are these beers brewed at certain times? And why can you only get these certain styles at certain times? And a lot of it, you know, I like to drink more bigger beers and stouts and whatnot, and when it's cooler out and stuff like that. So I love the seasonality of beers. I get excited, you know, I get excited for the beers of every season. So like coming into the fall, the fest beers and the Mardsons, I get so kind of excited for those beers, and then, you know, darker beers in the winter, and then, you know, even like more like say like double IPAs and things like that. I think it's really important. And yeah, I think we're getting away from the days that you just drink Coors Light all the time kind of thing. You know, you just buy your 2-4 of it and away you go. And people are realizing that it's, you know, it's more like food. You do eat and you do drink different things at different times of the year.
Totally, yeah, I get that. Like, I mean, obviously people have different preferences at certain times, but it's nice to hear, like, hey, like I would imagine that seasonality makes it interesting for you as a brewer, like to, hey, this season's coming up, let's try this, or no.
Absolutely. And just getting excited for it. And, you know, we do see it. You know, people are going to want, in the summer, they want more sours, and they want more kind of, you know, lighter beers, being it lagers, or, you know, more like lighter ABV, like pale ales and stuff like that. And yeah. What are your thoughts on it?
I think the fact that I said I call bullshit on people says what I think about it. It's important. It has to be. It has to be interesting for you, because if you're not enthused making beer, how are we going to be enthused enjoying it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, nobody wants to brew the same thing all the time either.
Yeah, and you don't want to drink the same thing. You don't want to brew the same thing. And sure, some of them are like knocked out of the park. Some of them aren't. But that's the important part. Is you don't win if you don't try, right? Yeah. But it's just the idea of people saying, well, I'm only particular to this style of beer. And I'm like, really? Come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do find that really, really interesting when people say that, because I can get it if you don't like coffee, you don't like roasted flavors and stuff like that, for an example. But there still is, like, outside of these couple flavors you don't like, there still is a world of beers to choose from. And I think I love when breweries do seasonal offerings, and I'd like to see more of them. Even then, I always say, like people say, like kind of, you know, to the tune of what you just said. Okay, well, say I don't like sour beers, for example. Okay, well, that's like saying I don't like pizza. So you tried pizza from one pizza joint, and you just wrote pizza off in general, when there are a bazillion types of pizza out there. I think you just didn't find the right pizza joint. So you don't like sour beers, but you say that, but you just didn't find the right one for you. You got to find the one that suits your palate. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Eric,
All right. I think this is my last question for now. Anyway,
it will be. You've had your limit for today.
So it's gonna give me a red card. You mentioned the seasonality of hops, or the vintages of hops, and it reminded me of a question I asked on the first conversations with Bill with Keith. I asked him about, you know, in the wine world they talk about vintages of wine, and, you know, 2010 is the vintage of the century in Tuscany. And so I was wondering, do you hear that? Like, you know, this is an exceptional vintage of Citra hops, and, you know, and then I've refined the question a bit in my head now, because, you know, you're not going to hold on to a hop from 10 years ago, or an IPA from 10 years ago, and talk about how great it is. So my refined version of the question to you is, in the brewer's world, do you kind of talk about like this is an incredible variety of or an incredible vintage of Citra this year? Like I'm gonna use maybe Citra is a bad example because it's one of the major hops, but do you hear about this is an awesome vintage of hop X? I'm gonna make more use of this hop this year because it's coming out so good and just tasting extra good relative to the last 5 years or something.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good question. I think there is a lot to be said for that. I think we're only starting to kind of pay more attention. Some brewers have been doing this a long time. Like some brewers will, for example, fly down to Yakima Valley and select, which rows of hops they're gonna have for that, or they're gonna buy for that season. And you have to buy quite a bit to be able to do that. But if you can, there's a lot of advantages because there's the same as wine grows, hops on this side of the yard are going to be slightly different from hops on that side of the yard. And you can obviously get are really picky about it. There's, for example, there was one of these past years, there's a crop of Amarillo, and I just can't really stand it. It kind of, what I always get, not a lot of people get this, but I get kind of like a black licorice or kind of thing from it, and it just doesn't sit with me well. Some people love it, but there was I'm not sure I forget which crop year it is. It's 2018 or something like that. But I've had Amarillo that I've just loved before, and then there's this one. So for example, I try to stay away from that one. So yeah, the bigger brewers they can have more kind of choosing power of which they get, because there is definitely very much so differences between different crops and different crop years, and where it's growing. And for example, we grow in Ontario now. We're growing a lot of like Cascade and Chinook and Centennial, and they're very different from the hops that are the same varieties that are being grown out west in the States. But they have all kinds of, you're not going to get the same thing from them, but they have all kinds of new kind of flavors in terroir coming out of them. And I think there has been, for a while, there's kind of been a bit of a stigma around them almost. They're like, where people are just like, oh, they're not getting the same thing. But we're using a ton of Ontario hops up now, and I've been very happy with them.
Sorry, for those of us who don't know what terroir is, what is that?
That's like if, say for example, it comes from kind of like the wine industry, where grapes at this side of the valley have more of a certain characteristics versus hops on this side of the valley, right? Like the environment that they're growing in.
Soil quality, the actual rainfall environment at that point in time defines your terroir, which is the descriptive term of these grapes were growing here in this spot. And it does have an impact on it based on soil type, as well as the actual climate for that year.
Yeah, how much the weather and how much rainfall comes, and all that stuff.
Yeah, how much sun you get that year. Yeah. When was the first frost versus when was the last frost versus when's the first frost in the fall, has an impact on everything about that crop year.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and happens. You never really kind of notice it with barley growing, because all this barley is blended together. But that's why they're the job of the grower, or probably more the maltster, is blending the appropriate malts together to get a kind of a consistent batch. So you're not really going to notice it as much, because so much goes into blending it from such a wide range. But barley grown in Alberta versus barley grown in Ontario is going to give you different results too.
So, at what point would you know that you're dealing with
Derek, you used up your limit.
Sorry, Bill. I'm sorry. When would you know you've got a great vintage of hops? Is it once you've brewed with it, or you've just had a couple sniffs of it, and you know that you know what you're getting off of it? Or?
As a brewer, I mean, once we brew that first beer with it, I think, I mean, our one hop supplier has been just raving about this year's Galaxy, and so our first beers with the Galaxy are coming out. So I'm excited to kind of see how it compares and if we have a noticeable difference. And yeah, it's exciting.
So Dave, you've done a wonderful job tonight of talking a lot about the science and the art of making beer. When on behalf of all of us who joined in for the tasting, I want to thank you for that, because this has been one of the most informative conversations that I have had. I want to remind everybody that next week, Marvin Dick from Wellington is going to be on, former colleague of Dave's. He has chosen for his topic, he wanted to talk about cask beer.
That's
And
perfect.
I sent out with the with your link a little bit about it. But in order for you to try, we're going to do our Cal Best Bitter out of a can, but we're also going to do our Cal Best Bitter out of a pin. When you place your order online, if you place it online, make sure you make reference to Marvin Dick's special beer. And if you're brave enough to sort of do a speakeasy style thing and drive up to the order window at Wellington, when you get there, you have to ask for Marvin Dick's special beer to get the actual pin, which has a little lower carbonation. And he also chose, he apparently the staff's favorite black and tan version is the Arkel mixed with the Russian Imperial Stout. And there are still Russian Imperial Stouts. So he has chosen those three specific beers for our conversation next week. Some of you may have noticed I've also moved from conversations with Bill to beers with Bill, because someone told me I should try that because it's easier and more descriptive. So I want to end, okay, by the way, I'm just going to keep on August. Graham from Counterpoint is joining us the week after that. And then at the very end of the month, an alumni who is a tenured professor at Washington University in DC is going to be on. Alan Petrobaum, he's actually from the KW area. And we will be discussing the history of Prohibition. And the week before that, we'll be releasing his talk that he did on beers with pints with profs down in Washington, DC. And you'll be able to view that. And then we're basically going to have a Q&A, and I'm going to find out what specific beer we're going to have for that one. So everybody, Dave, thank you. I'm going to stop recording at this time. I'm going to let you guys can all unmute. You can socialize. I'm not going to shut anything off other than the recording right now. But Dave, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the promotion of Kickoff. And for the rest of you that made those disparaging comments about the bartender, I do know where you live.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.